Thanks, Dr. K. Let me just help you on the surveys there. The part that says, was the speaker real good, just put a 5 there, and that part will be done, okay? Also, too, make sure, please, that you've signed in. We've got a roster either going around or sitting someplace that needs to be signed in. And we really use these evaluations and also the rosters to give us good ideas of what we need to do next. The next training that we're rolling out for the system has to do with allowable costs, 821. And I think on one of our presentations we did here, some of your folks, more than one, had put down that you wanted some 821 training. That's helped drive this whole new training program that we actually rolled it out in Columbia this week, and hopefully by the end of this year, by 12/31, we'll get to most of the campuses for that. So we really do use those. We appreciate your comments, and so if there's things that you really would like to see, then please let us know. Okay. If I go too fast, stop me, or if you have a question, let me know. I'm not good behind the podium, so you'll see me walking around here, and again, if you have some questions or if I'm going too fast, just stop me. What we're talking about today is the Segregation of Duties sponsored programs. And really what it's going to deal with is the Delegation of Authority form. But we're going to talk a little bit. Earlier today, the Associate Controller Steve Stanley was here talking to our folks that deal with unrestricted. Were any of you guys in that session? Okay. This is going to be very helpful for you because really these two pieces work together. And it's important that you understand on a high level how they work together, and that will make your job in the departments a lot easier when we come to how do we do our transactions. Before I start, let me just say that one of the problems we had in putting this policy that's going out together was the fact that we've got two parallel paths. We've got a path that is the allowability from the grant side, the sponsored program side, that says, I'm a PI, and I'm the only person who can determine whether a cost is allowable to this grant. And the other side, which is I'm a departmental chair or a vice provost, and I say that everything that goes through my area, I'm going to look at every penny to make sure that it's appropriate. And those two paths can work, quite well independently as long as we understand that the part that we're going to talk about relating to restricted and the sponsored programs and a particular PI's responsibility starts before our financial side starts. And then after the PI has made that determination, then our fiscal side doesn't change how it was before. If your particular administrative people want to look at every single penny that rolls through their area, then they're still going to do that. It doesn't change. The only thing that changes is that we at some point have inferred to our auditors and to our sponsors that our PIs were looking at every expense before it went through before it got recorded to grants. And that may have been the case in a lot of cases, and in some cases maybe it wasn't, but we couldn't document it in any way. We couldn't really show. And so we're going to do two things with this policy and with this form. Number one is we're going to consistently give us a path to document that the charges that hit sponsored programs are allowable. And then number two, we're going to say that, gosh darn it, our PIs are so busy, they cannot look at every single penny that rolls through their grant. How do we do this and how do we expect researchers to research? Well, how we do that is we give them a vehicle to delegate the authority to purchase to somebody in their department who has first-hand knowledge of their grant, who understands cost principles and knows what's allowable and what's not. And once they delegate that authority, then that person can authorize the purchases. And in some cases, that person can also review some of the transactions to make sure they're recorded appropriately. But on a high level, that person will not be able to do the final review of the transactions to make sure that they are and should have been allowable to the grant and are appropriate for that grant. So, all that being said, that's basically what I'm going to be covering here today. Segregations of duties are important. From an unrestricted side, it's one of those things that roll into restricted because you never want to have the same people recording, authorizing, and reviewing a transaction. Understanding that we've got resource limitations, and hopefully you folks that were here earlier today, what we gave you in that presentation was a vehicle so that if you have, say we need 5 people to do are transactions in the perfect world, and we only have 3 people, hopefully we gave you a way of determining how that separation of duty process can work while we only have 3 people. And also the ensuring that we've got appropriate documentation for all of our expenses. And then I'm going to shortly cover your delegation of authority form. So our policies, these are going to begin October 1st. Segregation of duties, they're in the APM, which is the accounting policy manual, which is on the controller's website. And what you'll find is that there's a 2.25.55 and then a .55.01. And the segregation of duties form is in 01. All right, this is the most important slide that I'm going to show you today. And so, and you've got a copy of that in your materials. And why this slide is important is because what it does is it shows you graphically how these particular policies fit together. And remember that we talked about earlier that the sponsored program side happens before the transaction takes place, before it's recorded into our system. And at this point, what we're doing is we're determining whether or not a cost is allowable. It's either allowable to the grant, and then it's allowable per A21 cost principles. After we've got that determined, then we go into the unrestricted side, which we talked about earlier today, dealing with separation of duties, and then also with your fiscal approval pass, where your administrative people will determine if they are going to approve it from a financial standpoint. This is the next comment is basically about A21 and A110. It's important that we understand that these particular policies dealing with allowability and allocability are not something that the UM system made up. Sometimes when I'm out on the campuses, people say, "You guys just keep on putting more policies on us and making us do more stuff." You know, the reality is that we don't think of this stuff at all. What we basically try to do is translate the regulations from the government to normal speak so that everybody can understand them. What's driving these particular policies as far as your allowability goes is A21 cost principles and your A110 administrative. And the purpose of this part, again, is to ensure that all costs that hit our grants are allowable and allocable. Why do we want to do that? Because we had a situation in the past, we had situations where grants were having costs put on them that weren't related to the grant. They weren't, for that reason, they weren't allowable. Sometimes costs that were in situations, say, where our general operating accounts were over budget or didn't have enough budget, and somebody had a grant over here where they had an extra $1,000 they didn't spend, we were seeing transfers over to those accounts and opening up $1,000 in unrestricted and then clearing off that grant. And of course, that by definition is unallowable. So that's why you're going to hear this, and I don't know if it was in this training or not, but we talked about the fact that in our conversations, when Eric and I are with the rest of the group in the controller's office talking about policies, we always talk about the advertising thing, that you don't remember it unless you hear it 3 times. So there's a couple of things here that you're going to hear 3 times today. One of them is going to be that all costs have to be allowable and allocable to the grant. The other one is that the PI is totally responsible for their grant. So after you've heard those 3 times, you won't hear them again. And here's your first one for your PI. Your PI has ultimate responsibility for the award. Now, we, as a system, see it as a collaborative process between the PI, the system, the campus, and the departments. And we see our role as trying to help relieve administrative burden from the PIs, at the same time making sure that we're as compliant as we have to be. The problem with compliance is a yes or no thing. You know, when we deal with our audits, you have a thing called materiality, and so you've got a situation where, well, maybe if it's $1,000, they won't worry about it. The problem with the A133 side, with the restricted side, is that the allowable number of exceptions is 0. We either are compliant or we're not. So there's no gray area. There's no middle ground. It either is or it isn't. And this is why it's so important we understand from the standpoint of the PI's ability to authorize transactions. There's only one person who can authorize a transaction to a grant from an allowability standpoint, and that's the PI. That's because that's who gets the grant and who's in charge of it. After that point, though, from the standpoint of the financial side, then each campus's own approval path process can take over. Even though we're going to give you a vehicle to delegate the authority to spend as a PI, you do not lose your responsibility for the award. That responsibility is set because it's in the award document that comes from the sponsor, and that's not going to change. So if things go wrong, if something goes south, the person they're going to call is you. So that's why it's important whenever, and we're going to talk about the qualities of someone who's going to be a delegate here soon, and it's important that we make sure that that those are kept. Also, I talked earlier about the fact that there are going to be some reviews that will be able to be delegated, but the PI's managerial review cannot be delegated. That's something that they have to do. Okay, we're going to talk about the delegation form now. Hopefully you have in your packet a copy of this. Okay, I'm going to cover the way it looks in just a second, but let's talk about the form itself real quick. We developed the form because there was, in an informal basis on all campuses, some method by which PIs were telling folks, go ahead and you can buy this for me. It could have been on an email. It could have been on a memo. It could have been on a napkin. In some cases, it was a phone call at 10 o'clock at night saying, do this for me the next day. The problem is consistency of the delegation. There's a number of qualities that our auditors were looking for, and also just to get some consistency across the system. And there are some things, and I know that we as campuses like to have our own personalities, but there are some things where we have to have consistency, and in this case with these internal controls it's going to have to happen. The form is only for sponsored programs. It's not something that you're going to use in your unrestricted side. The form, once it's done, is going to be maintained in the department. Why? Because that's where the transactions are going to take place. And the transaction level is where this has to be decided. So we do give the option for your sponsored programs office to keep a copy. And I don't know, Paula, have you guys decided? Okay, so you guys are going to ask for a copy to be sent to sponsored programs. I think that's a smart idea because generally what happens when we're chasing audit samples, we try to go through the sponsored programs office if we can, and it minimizes the amount of folks that have to end up chasing down documentation. So what this does for us from an A133 standpoint, though, it gives us consistency so we can say at whatever level that we've got a good program, that this PI did delegate the authority, that all the qualities that have to exist do, and it also it will give the PI some information as far as what the expectation is. Okay, we're going to talk about the form now. We'll go to the top of the form. Some of the key parts about this is that you notice that there's only one place for a MoCode or a project. And many times we get the question, can I put more than one project on a delegation form? And the answer is no. Why is the answer no? Well, because how are you going to look it up? Whenever we look it up from an audit standpoint, we're pulling it by project. And so that's why there's one project per form, and when you file it, you're going to want to file it by project. Number two is the PI and their signature. That is actually the authorization. And we'll talk a little bit later about ProCard authorization, because that's always a sticky subject as far as determining, okay, at what point is this authorization take place? And we have to determine that, and depending on how you do your ProCards, we'll decide how that is. And then basically the other part here basically says that I, the PI, have ultimate responsibility even though I'm going to delegate this authority. And this authority is the purchase, and it doesn't remove my responsibility to run this grant. The other half is where we actually do the delegation. Now, there's four, on the page itself, there's actually four boxes. On this, there's one or two. And we set up the form so that you can use it many times. You can have more than one person be a delegate, but we're going to talk in a second about who the delegate should be. But the beauty of the form is that you can use the same form if you have to change it. For example, if you have a form filed and somebody leaves, the question is, well, I need to delegate to somebody else. Well, the form, the way it's set up, allows you to pull it out, to remove them, put the date that you remove them, add somebody else, put their name on there, and then the PI can date and initial. And that can be done a number of times, or at least twice, because of the number of boxes on the form. So originally this came out in an Outlook form. You know, we thought that it would be very handy to just do it through email, but we never could get the form to print. And that seemed to be the biggest, and the thought process originally when we did the form was that nobody would want to take this off of their machine and print it. But yeah, what we found was that all anybody wanted to do was print it. And so now it's in a PDF form that can be printed and filed manually. So we're still looking. We're hoping at some point to come up with a way that we can do this electronically so we don't have to have so many manual processes. But as of yet, we haven't been able to develop it. Let me talk for a second about the delegate, because this is the most important part about the delegation process, is understanding that not just everybody can be a delegate. To be a delegate, you have to understand, you have to have knowledge of the award. You have to understand cost principles, A21. Not that you have to be an expert, but you have to know what's allowable cost and what's not. You have to have awareness of the transactions. You have to know, what does this transaction do for this particular grant. And you have to have knowledge of the terms and conditions of the award itself. Occasionally we'll have agreements that even though A21 says something is allowable, the terms of the contract will say that it's unallowable. And so you don't want to be authorizing a transaction that is on the face of the contract unallowable. Now, and lastly, the delegate must be a university employee. That sounds kind of weird, but honestly, on many campuses, we have co-PIs who, or other delegates who, co-PIs who are not employed by the university. For example, we have one in St. Louis where the PI is on the St. Louis campus, and then the co-PI is at the community college there. So from the authorizer standpoint too, when you authorize, you're not authorizing the dollar fiscal side, you're authorizing the allowability. One of the pieces that you have to be looking at if you're a delegate is this whole thing about awarded budget. I'm not going to talk too much more about the allowability and allocability, but awarded budget, okay? One of the big gaps that we have as a system is the fact that we don't deal with our budgets very well. When you look at A21, Section J29, what it says basically is that you can't exceed the way that they phrase it is your revenue, but conceptually, the way the OIGs look at it is that your budgeted revenue is going to be the most that you could spend also, because to an OIG, revenue equals expense, and that makes sense in a restricted world. So, but you can't exceed that on any grant, for any time, for any reason. That's the words right in the circular. Now, I'm not familiar with that this particular campus has the issues that some of the others do, but there's many campuses that don't do a very good job with watching the budgets on their grants. And so the expectation is whenever we delegate, that person who's been delegated is going to be also checking to make sure that the awarded budget is not exceeded if that particular transaction is approved. Okay. Another issue that's come up many times across our system when we deal with our audits has been documentation. Now, on a normal transaction, the expectation of documentation is kind of set out dependent on what kind of transaction it has. For example, if you go to your Pro cards, it lists out what the expectation is there when you look at your non-PO vouchers. So the expectation is that those will be consistent within the sponsored program side. The other issue, though, has to do with cost transfers. I spoke earlier about the issue with cost transfers as far as making sure that they're allowable to our grant, that they directly relate to the grant, that they're within the period of availability, that they're timely. What we've come up with is two different qualities of documentation based on the age of a transaction. And again, I'm going to go to an explanation on the second one, but it's not something really that we've driven. For transfers less than 60 days old, we're going to say that it needs to be sufficient. Sufficient documentation is going to tell the PI is going to certify, or the delegate is going to certify that the costs are allowable and how the costs benefit the award and why the transfer is necessary. In situations where the cost transfer is over 60 days old, we've got a quality called substantial documentation. Substantial documentation tells us who, what, when, where, why, how, and most importantly, what are you going to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Now that seems kind of large, and it seems kind of painful. And it's supposed to be large, and it's supposed to be very painful, okay? I'd like to take credit for coming up with that, but actually that was lifted out of a OIG audit that hit one of our colleague institutions whenever they were fining them $5.6 million on cost transfers that were done over 60 days old, that when they pulled the documentation, they discovered that the documentation said something to the effect of to move costs. They don't find that sufficient. They don't find that acceptable. And the problem is that in the current frame that we're in with our sponsors, there's a lot of emphasis on trying to get monies back. And so we don't want to be in a situation where we can't document that these costs are good. And that's kind of the worst, the most bitter taste about the whole deal is when you do work in good faith and you've spent it on the award and you've gotten the results that you expected and you've done the reports and the technical reports and everything else is beautiful, and then they come in a couple, 3 years later and say, why did you do this transfer? And all you can tell them is to move costs. And they're going to say, unallowable. So it's very important that we're bringing it up with our segregation of duties and that, but it's actually, this goes for all of our processes across sponsored programs. Earlier this year, we had a PCE audit. We actually went through, a year ago, we brought the new policy in that said, here's what we do over 60 days. We make you sign all of these papers. Everybody has to look at it, and then it goes through. And then so a year later, exactly a year later, we did an internal audit across the system to see how is this policy working. And what we found was that the one question that I hope everybody realizes should have been asked on every single one of those, the first question should have been, is this allowable to the grant? There was one question that across the board was never asked and never documented. You know what that question was? Is this allowable to the grant? So that was problematic. But the other thing that happened whenever they were doing, and this is our internal auditors, but when they pulled the documentation, they were looking at some of the reasons why the transfer was done. And we want to make sure that we don't, as a rule, come up with reasons like this, at least put it down on paper for others to see. I especially like the last one. First two, I can sort of see that, but the last one, I don't know where that came from, because that sort of means I must have made somebody to do it, but I don't remember ever doing that. But that actually was on more than one PCE that was out there. So if you are doing transfers, and remember we've got our documentation levels of sufficient and substantial, but never please write to spend out awards, to move costs to grants, or due to pressure from the UM system. I promise I won't pressure you. How's that? Okay. Steve talked earlier today about these processes of authorization, verification, managerial review. The beautiful thing with a PI from an allowability standpoint is a PI they're a special entity in the sense that there's many things that they can do that other people can't. And one of these things is that they can they can do a number of these processes themselves. It doesn't mean they should. Again, we're going to get to a resource issue that says, do I have all these people in place to take care of this? But they do, from a allowability standpoint, have the ability to do those things. We talk about verification, though. We're talking about it's going to confirm the accuracy and the timeliness of the transaction. And most importantly in our campuses is to confirm that the cost transfers are properly documented. I'll give you a story about a audit I was on when I first got here. It was actually a couple years ago, and I was sitting across from an OIG. They came out of San Francisco. They were Department of Justice. And they pulled a transaction for $30,000. And they said, let me have the documentation for this. Okay, so we went and pulled the documentation, and the transfer was for a grant that had ended 2 years before this one started. It was on an NSF grant, not on a Department of Justice grant. And of course, the reason on it was to move costs. Now, unfortunately or fortunately, the people who generally are sitting across from the OIG whenever they are looking at stuff like that is me, and it's very uncomfortable. Because at that point, there's really not much I can say other than we'll write you a check. So we did end up having to give that money back. But I guess my point is that, you know, a lot of these things that we're talking about are going on now and are going on our campuses, and so we need to make sure that we clear these up. Okay, the PI has ultimate responsibility for the award. In case anybody's counting, that's 2. Okay, you got one more of those. The PI can't delegate your managerial review. You know, talking about the reality of the environment we live in, especially these guys who have big labs. You know, it sounds good to say we're going to do our reviews quarterly, and I think if the proper staffing is there, then we say at some level that some of this review can be done quarterly. But, you know, the reality is that with transactions, especially in these larger labs, the reviews have to be done on a monthly basis because otherwise there's just too much. There's just way, way too much. So we're asking that our PIs do their review on a monthly basis. Now, the fiscal review, I think those, again, can go on in monthly chunks, but your PIs really have to look at theirs on a monthly basis. This is a chart that's similar to what we did this morning as far as laying out the optimum level or less than optimum level of segregation. And the purpose of this is to demonstrate, you know, that the PI can do a lot of things. And we're saying the PI can't authorize their own reimbursements, and that really somewhat falls into our unrestricted rules too. There's also one thing that we didn't write down here that we probably should have, but they won't let me write it down, so I couldn't. And what it is that the PI cannot record their own transactions. And I hope that that's not happening on this campus. There's really, once you get to that point, your segregation level is kind of destroyed because they are the only person who can authorize. So you can't have a situation where they're authorizing and recording at the same time. So anyway, this chart hopefully will help demonstrate that the PIs have the ability to do a lot of things, but they can't record. Okay. In a managerial review, what we're looking for is to make sure that we've had segregation occur, that the costs are allowable, that all costs are posted to the award. You know, I guess what we're saying is that if I'm managing an award, I know what I kind of expect to see hit. And so when I look through those transactions, I expect that they're all going to be there. Also looking to see that the costs are within the period of availability. Whenever we started this 60-day process, the question came up was, is this consistent with the government's expectation of that the costs are going to be completed within 90 days, that there'll be no transfers over 90 days old. And the reason why it's consistent is because the government expects that there's going to be a review of all the transactions within the month that it takes place. You have 60 days, and this is not our rules, this is coming from the OIGs. This is in the A110, it's also in the NIH financial handbook. You review your transactions within 30 days. Within 60 days, you discover and fix errors. And so there's your 30, your 60, there's 90 days. So that's your 90-day window that they talk about that you can fix. So our time periods are very consistent with what the government expects us to do. And if you don't follow the time periods that we've set up, then there's going to be issues if we get checked. Now, one of the things that's been pretty consistent on the audits that have come out recently is that, and actually we saw it last quarter whenever the NIH did every quarter they set up their OIGs and they do a presentation on what they expect their auditors to do and how they expect them to do it. And basically they said, here's the deal. Any cost transfer on any grant that's over 90 days old is unallowable. Unallowable unless it answers these questions. Who, what, when, where, why, how, and what are you going to do to keep it from happening again? So it's very important that we go to these new standards and we get them in place and we make them work, because we know that we're going to be held to them. The PI, by doing a managerial review, will also be doing at the same time the verification. And so the question has come up in these processes of, well, does the PI have to do a managerial and a verification? But quite honestly, if they're doing one, they're doing both. And so their signing the report actually is evidence of both. Okay. We're about to go into the FAQs, which hopefully will cover questions that you guys will have in your departments, and if not, we can talk about that after. But before I go, is there any questions about the subjects that we've covered so far? PCEs, documentation, the form, who gets it, who keeps it? Okay, great. Okay, let me just say that the policy and the form are effective October 1st. If you've got the other form already in place, with the Outlook form, we're not requiring that you go back and backfill and change those, because the way that the rules will work is basically whatever happens after October 1, the expectation will be that form. Whatever happened prior to October 1 will be on the Outlook form. We are encouraging that you begin using the new form now, because it's going to be consistent for what we're using going forward, and that should be available on the web. Okay, first question. How does the policy impact the fiscal officer? If the PI delegates authorization, the departmental fiscal officer confirms the expenditure was authorized, the accuracy, and its agreement with the university's rules. How does the policy change the interaction between departments and the sponsored programs office? Doesn't change. The accounting offices will still check PS authorization for authorized signatures. And remember this, and the reason why we're not asking that people load the PIs into your PS authorization is because that's way past the point that the PI's authorization, the PI's signature should have been collected. If you're waiting till that point to get that, it's too late, because it has to be done at the transaction level. It's got to be done before we record it. How does the policy affect the PI? PI is responsible for all transactions, but they can delegate it and the form becomes adequate and consistent documentation across not just the campus, but the UM system, should we get audited. Are there exceptions to when a PI can authorize transactions on an award? Yes, the PI cannot authorize their own transactions, especially for travel or expense reimbursement. Does the PI need to complete a form if they sign their own invoices? No. And that's the important thing to note, too, is that, because the discussion at one point was, well, why don't we just send a delegation form out with every new grant? Well, because the PI may not want to give somebody else authorization to spend on their account, and that's perfectly acceptable. Where we expect to see a lot of this happen is folks that have a lot of grants, or people that are running labs that are very, very busy and they don't have time to do this type of activity themselves. Can a co-PI delegate authorization? Yes. The co-PI has the same authority as a PI, as long as they're a university employee. And we need to look at the last part here, named by the sponsor. There are some campuses, we discovered given this presentation on other campuses about co-PI. And on some campuses, what happens in the PeopleSoft software, they put somebody else in the co-PI slot who is actually an alternative contact. Say there's someone who works with them, and if so-and-so's not here today and I can't get a hold of him, I can call this person. And that's not a co-PI. Co-PI is somebody that's named by the sponsor on the award agreement. And do you know if this campus, are you guys using that for real co-PIs, or are they alternative contacts? They are co-PIs. They have to be named. Okay. Well, then you guys are in good shape. I don't know if you saw, too, the NSF has just come out with their guidance that came out the 1st of October. It starts January 1, and they further defined co-PI. And fortunately for us, their definition was the same as what we've just gone to. So, do expenditures on awards need pre-authorization? No, but the department can require that if that's what they want to do. What documentation is required for cost transfers? It depends on how old it is. If it's under 60 days, it needs to be sufficient documentation. If it's over 60 days, it needs to be substantial. You need to look at the timeliness, and also very important is if it's related to payroll, then you need to assess whether an EVR has to be updated in order to make it agree. What effect does the policy have for anyone authorizing transactions on an award? The PI can delegate authorization to anybody as long as they have direct knowledge of the activity, awareness of the terms and conditions of the award, awareness of the compliance requirements, and knowledge of the transaction. That last one probably might tickle your interest a little bit, because the question is, what does that mean? And there's been situations in the past where people have been authorized to initiate transactions, but they didn't really even know what the transaction was. Somebody wants to go to Walmart. Okay. Well, what were they going to get? What was it going to do for the grant? They didn't know. They didn't know what the transaction was. They just authorized it. And so that's one of the qualities of your delegate. How does the policy apply to feeder systems? The PI or delegate has to provide authorization for the feeder system when the transaction is originally initiated. One of the concerns when this started was that PIs would have to go through every payroll run and authorize every payroll. And no, that's not the way it works. It's whenever you set somebody up on payroll the first time, once they're authorized, and that feeder can go in. What's a fiscal? Anything that's a feeder, that should be authorized before it starts. And then, of course, the issue is budget then. And that's one of the things that we run into a lot is they'll set it up for postage to hit, and then the postage will go over what the budget is. But from an authorizing standpoint, that's the point at which we do it. And then the budget is the second issue that has to be dealt with. What's the fiscal officer's role in authorization? The fiscal officer should verify the transactions are authorized by either the PI or the delegate. And also they have to keep that documentation in their department. One of the things that we were concerned about was when we started this process, and really we started this to take load off the PI because the PIs were saying we're putting too much on them, they're too busy, they can't authorize every transaction even though they sign the agreement and agree to do it. So we had a few that said to us, well, I'm just going to make everybody a delegate. And so, or I'll just have my departmental fiscal person the delegate. And, you know, that's why when you look at the qualities of the delegate, they've got to meet certain criteria as far as understanding the grant, knowing cost principles, understanding how it's going to help the grant, that type of thing. So, anyway. Is the information on the form required to be entered in the PeopleSoft? No, you can do that. I don't think you should.
They do that here.
Okay.
I believe that's the practice, is that you
Okay.
just repeat that, you know, so you can pick that up. The PS, the information from these delegation forms is entered here.
Okay.
At Paula's office.
All right, that's fine, but understand that the authorization, that what information you're getting is way beyond at the point that the authorization should take place. The authorization has to take place before it's recorded. And so if you're not seeing anything until it comes through PS authorization, that's way too high. So it might be good for some tracking mechanism, I guess, but that doesn't do anything for 821. Okay.
And telephone charges and things like that. And we need to send an email or fill out one of these forms for the person who's actually doing JE for the telephone charges and distributing them out to the departments. How do you authorize
the invoice until after they send it to us? Like it hits our account before we see the invoice, and then we have to make corrections if it's wrong.
Right. How do we authorize?
Okay. Okay, but let's repeat the question, which has to do with if the postage is actually done by a JE, then does somebody who's doing the JE in the department have to be authorized so that they can actually do that?
Right.
Okay.
On our campus, we use these postage cards that we put in with the mail that requires postage.
Mm-hmm.
But the mailroom doesn't require them to be signed, although there is a signature line on them. And then when they get to the mailroom, they're scanned. There's a barcode on there. They're scanned, and then it's charged through some computer system to the appropriate code.
Okay.
Likewise, the telephone numbers here on campus are charged to certain codes depending on how they're programmed over in the IT department.
Right.
So how do we pre-authorize those charges appropriately?
Okay, well, conceptually, with the telephone, for example, at some point the PI is saying, here's my code for all these telephone charges for this grant. Okay? There's your authorization.
So it's just an email then to like a work order to the IT department saying charge
Right.
1, 2, 3, 4 to code
Right. Because
1067 or whatever.
right. Because remember that once the PI has authorized it, that is the hump we have to get over.
So the PI then should also be signing these mail cards.
Yes, they should. If it's not just going into a feeder system, because what you're describing to me is not what I would call a feeder system. They're actually initiating some charges to that, and so they should be, signing and dating whenever they agree that goes to their grant. Yeah.
That brings up another question. What precisely do you mean by a feeder system? What I had in mind is not what we've been talking about.
Okay. The one that comes to my mind off the top of my head is the ProCard that's fed in. But every campus does them a little bit differently too, and I've got a slide here shortly that's going to talk about ProCard, because that's kind of a weird situation, having to determine at what point does authorization occur. So let me see if that's close here, because that actually will get us into that conversation. Does PS Global Authorization give the fiscal officer authorization to spend on an award activity? No. No, it does not, because they do not meet the direct knowledge requirement, and the delegates must have direct knowledge. In many cases, too, we don't require fiscal officers to know A21 and to understand the terms and conditions of specific awards, and so that's where you don't pass those tests whenever you get to those levels. Can the PI delegate managerial review? No. PI has ultimate responsibility, and at some point they've just got to put their signature on it and saying, yes, this is how I intended it to be charged. What should be maintained to document the PI's managerial review? They should sign and date either a budget to actual comparison, written justification for cost transfers, and or a detailed list of transactions for the award. What should the PI look for in managerial review? This is important because when we started this process and discussing with PIs, they basically came up and they said, well, I'm a researcher. I don't know nothing about finance, so how am I going to go through? And, I mean, if I look at it, it just looks like a bunch of words to me. I don't know really what I'm looking at. What should I do? The expectation is that we're going to look for clerical errors, salary posted to the award when no effort was made. That means somebody's on my grant that's not supposed to be. We had a situation on one of the campuses where the dean decided that they didn't want to pay for their administrative person, and so they just moved them to a grant. Unfortunately, the PI wasn't looking at their charges, and so like 6 months later, then somebody stumbled upon it and found out that, oh, here's this person we paid for 6 months, and they're not even on the grant. So in some cases, and we're saying it effort to the award because conceptually that's really what the government's looking for. Supplies or travel not related to the award, costs outside the period of availability or duplicate charges. We did some tests on some direct charges on some different campuses, and the amount of times that there was duplicate charges really was kind of shocking because we thought at some level that there was some review being done that would have caught that. And the funny thing was, talking to the PIs, and there was 3 or 4 of them, and they all said almost in unison, is we thought you guys were looking at it after we submitted it. And, we're in the controller's office, and I'm like, we don't look at your stuff on campus, it's your guys' stuff. And they said, well, we thought somebody on our campus was. And that just wasn't really what was taking place. So that's important to look for. And lastly, costs related to the award that are missing. Okay, I know this person belongs to me, but I don't see any of their payroll hitting my grant. That happens quite a bit, too. How does this policy change the current process for authorized signers? The PI has to put a form in, a delegation form for the delegate to be authorized. And again, they have to meet these qualities to be a delegate. Can the PI use one form to delegate authorization for multiple sponsored programs, sponsored awards? No, you can only have one project per form. And that's because that's how we're going to file those in the department. So whenever we're asking for them, we're going to ask for them by project, and so it'll be quickly to pull them up. Can you have multiple individuals on an award? Yeah, you can. But remember that they all have to have all 4 qualities to be a delegate. And in some cases that can happen. If you've got a big lab and you've got a couple of grad students or a couple of folks on fellowship, it's possible to have 2 or 3 people that really have that level of knowledge, and in that case, that's okay. Remember, though, you've got to hit that budget. You've got to understand that if there's a budget left or not. What if one of the delegates leaves the department? The form needs to be updated. And very, very important is all forms must be kept. Remember that your forms are covering a period in time, and we're going to look at these back 3, sometimes 4 years later. And so we're not going to remember all the personnel situations that happened at that time. And what the keeping the form does for us is that for that period of time, if it gets picked to be looked at, we're actually going to have some contemporaneous documentation that's going to support who signed that transaction. So that's very, very important, is keep all forms. Can the PI put a dollar and time limit on the delegations? Yeah, I don't suggest you do it. You're going to put all kind of complexities into the process that you don't want to have. We put it on there for flexibility, but we highly suggest that you don't do it.
I have a question. What's the difference between a delegate and an authorized signer? Because there's people that are authorized on my grant to sign that have really not an idea of what my grant is or what should be an authorized expenditure. And just because one person's out and another person can sign, I want to make sure that I'm not liable as a delegate by having that person sign, because I need to process that.
That's a good question. And actually, we had many, many heated arguments over definitions when we were putting this together. An authorized signer relates to your PeopleSoft authorization that really relates to your fiscal side of the house. A delegate is someone who's been delegated for allowability reasons from the sponsored side of the house. So conceptually, there is a possibility that you could have someone who's both a delegate and an authorized signer. The reality is it would be highly, highly unlikely. So, but remember that what you're looking at is the person who is the delegate is only looking for allowability. They're looking for, does this meet the criteria of 821? Is this going to directly relate this to this award? Do I know the terms and conditions of this award to make sure it's not going to violate any of those? So, you know.
I guess my question is, I'm sure that I'm going to be a delegate on our grants. And we also have authorized signers. And like on a non-PO voucher, for instance, I sign it and then I send it on for the PI to sign it or an authorized signer to sign it. So are they just trusting me as a delegate that I've said, okay, it's an allowable expense, and then they sign on it? Do you see what I'm saying when you mean a delegate?
Yeah, I don't think that the authorized signers are looking for allowability. They're looking for, is this authorized within the confines of the collected rules and in the departmental rules as far as fiscal operations? So I think that you're going to be looking for two different things, although your fiscal people should look to make sure that either you or the PI has authorized that it is allowable. So again, I think that we're working through two paths here as far as you're looking at allowability, and then they're going to look for the fiscal side, but they need to make sure that you have signed it or the PI has signed it to say this is an allowable cost.
Okay.
Does that help? Okay. Let me just say this once again. You can put $1 in time limit on the delegations, but it's highly suggested that you don't, because think about managing that in a department, especially if you have a lot of transactions and trying to figure out, okay, now this person had it from this day to this day, and he can do $50, and it's $52, so who can do it? You know, it would just be impossible. We put it on there for flexibility, but I don't suggest that anybody use it. Where do I keep the form? You got to keep the form in a department to support the authorization on the award, and also on this campus, then you'll also move a copy to sponsored programs, and they'll keep it with the award documentation. And that's handy for us because whenever we request audit information from them, then they can scan it and send it on. Again, this is also important. We had one campus that, when we covered this, they said, well, I know from already dealing with the Outlook form that they want me to be a delegate, but I don't want to be a delegate. I don't qualify to be a delegate. I don't meet these criteria. Which is not something I can really deal with. They need to. But the point is, your delegate needs to have a form so that they know they're a delegate. You will have to deal with, your PIs will have to deal with the fact if they don't want to be a delegate. But the delegate gets a form, the departmental fiscal officer, and then in our case, the sponsored programs office will also get a copy. What are the retention requirements for the form? The form has the same retention requirements as the award, which is 3 years past the last financial report that's submitted. So that's also why it's good to keep it with the award, is because then it'll go with that. Some of our departments are taking the PDF and scanning it in instead of keeping it in a paper form. They're scanning it and keeping it in a directory so that they have it electronic and they don't have to worry about keeping up with it as paper. So. Also in the case where we've got OIG audits, and unfortunately for us, that is quite common right now. And remember, we had difficult audits in 05 and 06, We're still dealing on a daily basis with people for '06, so it's going to be, you would count 3 years past now, and it's not even closed yet. So you need to be aware of if there's any type of audit activity going on also. And you can find that out through your sponsored programs office, or if they're not sure, they'll call us. Okay, this is a fun one here. We'll talk about this for a while probably. When does authorization occur for a P-card transaction? Okay. I'm not sure how you guys do your P-cards here. You know, at one of the campuses, what they do is they've got one person who does all the P-cards, and then they download the information into a spreadsheet, and then they separate it by project and by MoCode. And then at the point that in that case, at the point that the PI signs saying, put this on my grant, then that authorization has occurred. So conceptually, depending on how you all do it, you need to think about at what point, what is the trigger for the authorization? At what point does the PI actually say, buy this for me? Now, what should never happen is you should never be in a situation where you download all the department's expenses and then you divide it out equally between all the MoCodes and you hit, okay? That should not happen at all. And if that's happening, then you need to get with Dr. K or Paula and let them know. So how do you guys do your P-cards here?
I think every department does theirs differently just because I've worked in different departments before reconciling the purchase cards. We currently have I'm an authorized person to enter the MoCodes, and then I reconcile, and then I sign, and then the purchase card person signs, and then our PI signs, or department head signs on the forms. So they don't actually see the transactions until after they've happened. In our department, we don't have any pre-authorization. They have spending limits, but we don't get pre-authorization. They just have a purchase card.
Right.
And
well, but think about this too, is if the PI has sent an email to somebody saying, buy this for my grant, there's the authorization right there. So, but from a consistency standpoint, you would still probably want to get it separated and make them sign that, even though you've got that, and you'd want to keep it. But, you know, when you get to talking about at what point does the transaction occur when it's kind of a virtual transaction, it's good to keep every little thing that you can, because we'll be arguing one way or the other to make sure that, you know, that we're right on it. But we've got to have everything that we can in order to support our position. So
just so I understand you, you're wanting someone to have prior signature before they purchase anything on a Pro card from the PI?
No. There's two ways you can do it. You can have prior authorization, and if you do, and from a PI, then that's the authorization you need. The other way is if purchases have occurred, then at that point the transactions have to be separated by MoCode, and then the PI has to sign off, or the delegates sign off at that point, and then that's where the authorization occurs. So one of the questions we had in other sessions like this was, and the debate is always related to at what point does authorization really occur? Does it occur when I sign? Does it occur when I email? Depending on who you are. And the other issue was, if I am the person and all I do in the department is separate P-card charges, do I need to be a delegate? You know, and the answer to that question is no, you don't, because you're not actually going to authorize that transaction. It's either going to happen when the email was sent to buy, or it's going to happen when you separate them out and you have the PI sign off that this goes to my MoCode.
I guess the question that comes to mind for me is reconciling it and putting that MoCode in. You're deciding whether it's an allowable expense or not for that grant, or you should be, before you enter that purchasing information into the system. And if you do enter it in the system and you don't know if it's an allowable expense, when it hits the grant, then you have to move it and provide your who, what, when, where, and how information. I guess, to me, I think the delegate, the person that enters the purchasing cards and reconciles, needs to be a delegate, because they need to understand the grants that they're reconciling the accounts for.
Yeah. Well, okay.
That's just my...
I see what you're saying, but realistically, I think the disconnect is that if you're in a situation where, say, you're the departmental person and you take all the Pro card charges and separate them out, before you record that transaction to the grant, you've got them separated and say this is what's going to go there, That's where the PI needs to come in and sign and say these are okay, and then the transaction's done on the system. The authorization really needs to occur before it's inputted in the system rather than after. So you may have to change your process a little bit there, and only maybe for sponsored side. But it's very, very important, because I want to tell you, whenever we're dealing with the external auditors, they're very, very picky about that. They're not confident with our controls that we've actually put in place to make sure that they work. And we get in conversations with them about, on a high level, did they mean to authorize it at this point? Even though we have the signature, did they mean to authorize it at this point? Or did they actually buy it? Should it have been authorized before the Pro Card purchase was made? So I mean, we've got to have some way of documenting exactly when it was authorized, and then, with consistency, then we can be affirmed. But, when we've got everybody doing it different ways, it's just very difficult to.
Well, in my instance, we're grant funded completely in our department. We have 9 grant accounts, and I'm going to be a delegate because I know our contract and I know what's allowable and what's not allowable. So I would be considered saying those expenses are okay when I enter them before a PI signed off. Is that what you're saying?
If you're a delegate, the PI would not have to sign off because you could sign off.
Okay.
But make sure that you have all 4 qualities. So if you're not A21, if you're not good with A21, you're going to have to get into it. Which is going to be our next training program we bring out to you probably. It's going to be A21, so let me give a little plug. Okay, we had somebody else?
We just go ahead and have the PI send an email or give us something in writing if they want something, if they have a copy of something from the catalog or whatever, they sign off, they put the code on there for their brand, and that gets attached to the purchasing paperwork, whether it's through the ePro system, through the P-card system, or even if it's a voucher. That's documented there, and it's either signed or an email from them, and then you're not having to chase them down to get the signature, and if they don't remember what it was for, and you say, well, I didn't approve that, it's all right there, and you don't even have to bother them with it down the road.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I love what you're saying there, because that doesn't happen in a lot of places, but that will keep all of us out of a lot of trouble, so we appreciate what you're doing there. That's a great program. Let me talk real quick, too. Oh, go ahead.
We have implemented a device where we have a form that you fill out. The PI signs it. They indicate what project they want it charged to. Before we ever purchase anything, that form has to come to us. If the PI signature is not on it, we do not order it. It goes back to the PI, they sign it, then it comes back to us, then and only then will we order it. I don't care what it is, if it's a bid request, whatever.
That's great.
They have to sign it first.
Yeah. You guys got some really excellent programs, and I tell you, that's good to hear, because some of the campuses we go to, it's very informal. It's almost frightening how informal it is. So that's a great program that you guys are doing. We appreciate that. You know what, too, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to see a copy of that form that you're using, because I could possibly spread that to some strategic places that I know need something like that. So if you could send that to me, I'd appreciate it. I'll get you my email before we leave.
Okay.
That's great. That's great.
Obviously, you're not talking between awards. You can't transfer costs between awards, right?
Thankfully, you said that, yes.
Right, okay.
That's not a belief
That's
widely
why
held, let me
That's
tell
why
you.
I'm asking the question. I want to clear my mind. Okay. Say you have an award, and then you've got the main sponsoring agency, all right? Then you've got some matching funds, and they've all got their own MO codes, right? Some of the match covers payrolls, and then some, maybe not the same sum, cover equipment, purchases, or supplies. Can you transfer between those MO codes within the award? That's the kind of the question I'm getting at. Is that?
Yeah, what you're saying, as long as you're not matching the same dollar twice, it sounds like, yeah, then you're good.
Right.
Yeah, the issue.
And that's why, because our, I guess, Darlene's our fiscal officer, I don't know, but they said, if you want to purchase this under this column, under this MO code, and then soon, within 60 days, if you want to transfer that to a different, match, or, that you really need to do that within 60 days.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we really do need to get these things done quickly. And I tell you, one of the things we ran into in '05 in the audit that they really dinged us for was we were buying, everything we bought equipment-wise was being bought in unrestricted. And then we'd see these transfers flow through, and even in '07, we were still transferring stuff from '05 out of general operated equipment into the fixed asset manager for restricted. And of course, we had already reported '05, '06, part of '07 to our sponsors, and so the costs just weren't even captured. So, this is why this whole thing, and you're going to see a lot of training come out about recording transactions right the first time. And your particular campus is not bad about that, but there's some campuses that it doesn't look like they record anything in the right place the first time. I mean, they're all transfers. There's nothing but transfers. So, we really have to, and I appreciate what you guys do here, and I hope that you keep that up too. So,
Do you see any problems with the PIs having their own credit cards? The purchasing cards.
well, I can't answer that unless I turn off that machine there. Okay. There's very few things that are more frightening, quite honestly, but I understand that we do that, and that's fine as long as we have controls on it. It's not a good idea in restricted programs to have people have pro cards, and I came from another university, and we struggled with the same thing, and it was decided after they tested it for a while, and we just couldn't. The thing about PIs is they're a very independent group. And we need them to be independent to do the work that they do. And so they don't think in terms of rules and structure and stuff like that, And so it's a real problem whenever we have rules and structures that they have to follow. So, yeah, it's kind of scary. But I understand that there are some campuses that do that, and that's fine, but we've got to control. Let me talk real quick about the review process on pro cards. Very, very important. I talked about our PCE process. Our PCE audit said that the one thing that we were looking for, or we should have been looking for, was the very one thing that nobody looked for. And the concern about pro cards is that if we're reviewing them, are we really looking at the pro cards and understanding the charges and saying, yes, these belong to me, or, this is kind of a weird deal. Who bought this, who went there to buy something for our grant. So I hope that we, as a group, get real excited about the pro card and get these reviews done and really start beating them up, because, the problem is with pro cards is you have to have a certain amount of flexibility for it to work right. But if you give too much flexibility, then bad things can happen. So anyway, as a group, I appreciate it if you guys would really dig in, and you folks that authorize pro cards, make sure you're looking at those transactions. It's very, very important. So anyway. I promised I wouldn't preach today, but that's my preaching for the day. So
as long as the pro card is...
I receive restricted funds very seldom, so I have a pro card, and we do all of our business using pro cards. We're encouraged to do that by our university. Are you saying on the instances where I need to, or where I'm doing business and I'm the PI on that one small little contract, I should not use the pro card? Or
no, what I was really addressing was just giving pro cards to the PIs and letting them go do.
Yeah, but see, I'm not faculty. That's a difference.
Yeah, okay. So your situation is exactly perfectly right. That's the way it should be, and then making sure that they sign off before you record it to their grant, and then you're beautiful. Yeah.
No. Say what you just said again.
That you should have the pro card, and you should buy it for them, and then whenever you get the bill, you should separate out their charges.
And that happens routinely, but there has been occasion where I've received a small award to conduct some program, and I'm the PI.
Okay. And you're recording the transaction?
Well, I go out and purchase the item on the pro card.
Okay, so that's authorizing.
That's authorizing. Somebody else is verifying it.
Okay. Who's recording it to the system? Who's putting it in PeopleSoft?
Whoever's reconciling the pro card.
And that's not you?
No.
Okay, you're good.
And then I have a third person who's signing as well.
Great.
Okay.
Great. Yeah, that works. Good. That's good.
So I know at our last training that you came to over in when did you come last spring?
Yeah, spring.
Yes, yeah, PC.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't here this morning, but the last time you were on campus, we talked about e-procurement, and I want to revisit that because I think there's pros and cons to this e-procurement because there is no reconciling part of it. It goes
Right.
directly to your account, and there's lots of things that I see more errors happening. I mean, you have to be very careful about going to each line item and changing your account chart field string, and there's lots more work entailed for not that double check to make sure before it hits your account. So any thoughts or suggestions on?
Yeah, when it comes to ePro, what should happen is that the authorization should happen before.
You have a slide on that.
I do.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, you do.
Well, let me just say too that if anybody, I'm going to jump ahead of the answer, but hopefully nobody has a pro card, a departmental pro card that's defaulting to a sponsored program. You know, we had a situation on a campus where the dean was very aggressive for their budget, and so what they did was all of their pro card charges went to a grant. And the reason why is because he got mad because whenever they go out and try to get all the PIs, all the different faculty, one just PIs, they try to get the faculty to take their piece. At the end of the day, there'd always be something left over. And then he would have to eat it because nobody would know where it went. And so what they did to fix that was they just put it all in a sponsored program thinking, well, then the sponsored program will take it, you know. But we can't do that. Only things that should ever hit a pro card for a sponsored program is strictly that sponsored program. So, okay, ePro. Okay. This goes back again to thinking about the transaction, the trigger for the transaction and authority. And authority has to occur before the transaction is recorded. And ePro, like you're saying, is a lot of situations is it's just going to go right in. And so that authorization has to come through an email or some other fashion that shows that it's authorized before it goes through the system. Does that help? If you're a delegate, then you're a delegate, so you can do that. And the question was, if you're a delegate, do we need to get something else? And the answer is no, because you're a delegate. So.
And my next question is on the delegate. How much responsibility are you holding delegates to? Because I solely don't want to be responsible because my PI said, sure, this is, you know, we read the contract together, this is how we understand it, this is allowable expenses, and then it comes back and I entered that requisition for $6,000. How responsible am I as a delegate on that?
Well, here's the deal. There's no take-backs on delegation, meaning that the PI can't say you're a delegate and then complain about what you have approved. Because before you're a delegate, you have to know what the award is, you have to understand cost principles, you have to know the agreement. So all the things that occur that the PI knows, you theoretically should know too. So, but the person that has the ultimate responsibility for the award is not the delegate, it's the PI. So the PI is going to have responsibility. That's why they have to be very, very sure of the people who are delegates. Because if you do the wrong delegate, they can burn you. But, you know, the thing is this process was put in place to relieve administrative burden from our PIs who said, I want to be a researcher, I don't want to be a purchaser. And so, you know, it's difficult, but this is the best thing we could come up with, at least at this time. So, all right. Oh, great. We got through the FAQs, too. There's a lot of concepts that we covered here today that really, some of them bleed back into unrestricted because of the control issues. A lot of it you're going to see, too, as we talk going in our programs that come out later, are going to talk about the reasonable person position, meaning that, you know, there's a real business sense to how we do grants anymore, and things have to be done based on, they're judged based on how a reasonable person, a person in business doing arm's length transactions would find this to be reasonable or not. One of the things that we deal with your OIGs when they beat up your travel is how much did your hotel room cost? And I can't tell you how many OIGs that I have to sit down with and argue about. Somebody paid $220 for a hotel room in Washington, D.C., and that's absolutely ridiculous. And because they're judging it based on, I'm a government employee and it only cost me $69. But we're not government employees, of course, and so we don't get that rate. But, you know, you and I are sitting here thinking, well, you know, what's $220 in Washington, D.C.? And probably the other question that should come to your mind is, why are they worrying about that? Well, that's what they worry about, quite honestly. That is what they worry about. So knowing that as we go through and do our business, when you look at these pro card charges coming across, or your e-pro, you've got to think about, okay, if somebody asks me this question about this, am I comfortable answering it? And then if you're not sure, that's the time to get your sponsor programs folks involved, and if they're not sure, then they'll come to us, and we'll help support whatever we've got to do. So.
Oh, hi, everybody. Back on, oh, you startled me. Back on slide 26, I would like to clarify that when it talks about the co-PI delegating their authority, it's only if they're on the sponsor award, not the PSRS. And we have seen very few co-PIs listed on award documents. Most oftentimes, it is the PI that's listed because the award comes to the curators. So the PI is listed, not co-PIs. So I didn't want you, on the award document from the sponsor, not the PSRS document that we have those listed, but on the award document from the sponsor, and rarely do we see that happening. So I just wanted to clarify that for everyone.
The only one that we do see it on there is the normally list OPIs.
What, Michelle?
The vast majority did not list the co-PIs. So the vast majority do not list the co-PIs, so we need to be careful in terms of interpreting your slide.
That's correct, and that's going back to our conversation about who is designated as a co-PI in PeopleSoft. And right now we're working, once the upgrade's done, we're going to put in another field that'll be, I'm not sure what we're going to call it yet, maybe alternate contact. But that has been our biggest issue, our biggest concern is that going to some of the campuses, they always have a co-PI, even though there's absolutely none in the sponsor program, in the award. But every award, they've got an alternative contact that they put in the co-PI field, and that will not work. So.
Yeah.
Sure.
One other question, Joe, if we can go back to slide 24. This is on PI cannot authorize transactions for their own business reimbursement, example, travel or expense reimbursement. Can you expand on that? If that's the case, who authorizes those expenses?
Okay. Now remember that we're not talking about the allowability to the grant. What we're talking about here is I do a travel voucher. I went someplace on my grant. And then I sign my travel voucher and says, okay, I went there. Okay, there is our A21 authorization. Now what do we do? I know on most campuses, we've got a chair, a dean, or somebody who's going to authorize that person's travel voucher. Okay? One of the concerns we had at one point, we were working with this new travel system. And the way this travel system worked, was going to work, fortunately we didn't actually go into it, but the way it was going to work was that the PI would authorize and it would bypass the other signatories. So the question came up because basically of that, no, the PI has got to get approval on, if they go on a trip, somebody else has got to sign it. Again, they're not signing allowability. They're signing for the financial side. If they put in a non-PO voucher for something, their signature signifies their allowability, but it doesn't cover the normal departmental, before I spend $1, my chair or VP is going to see it. So,
yeah, typically on our travel form, using that travel expense report, the administrative supervisor is the last person who signs off.
Mm-hmm.
So from what you're saying, that will take care of this issue.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
But the PI still got to have signed it for the allowability.
Correct.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I confuse myself with the delegation of authority and the authorization in this form. This form does not need to be submitted for the departmental secretary who implements and processes the paperwork to, for instance, the Pro card. my department person who reconciles all of my pro cards is not authorized or delegated or assigned to a particular project, even though they're using that Mo code to assign costs to that project. Is that correct?
Yeah, and they're not actually authorizing the purchase. The PEI has authorized the purchase at some point.
Yeah, anytime that PI's name is going to be on there either as the purchaser or as the approver of the purchase because his contract is being used.
Okay.
But you said something earlier, or she said something that made me
Because
pause.
she's both a delegate and the person in the department that does the pro card. So she actually has both of those functions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I do a non-PO voucher, I sign on the voucher, and then I send it to Dr. Collier's office because he's over our department, and he signs on it. So the PI doesn't have to sign because they're out traveling. My PI travels a lot. I don't see them at least maybe a week and a half, a month. So it's that they're gone, and it's a different circumstance. So I have to be a delegate in that stance, but I'm not the only one signing. Dr. Collier as well is reviewing what I entered in the system before it goes to accounting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing is we can't say on a blanket level virtually anything about this because everybody's got their own little tweak in their circumstances. But if you understand conceptually where we're trying to get as far as the PI authorizing for A21 and then your fiscal approval paths that take care of the fiscal side, then we can get there. So, all right. Anybody have any other questions? Okay, I'm going to turn over to Erica now then. I appreciate your attention, and Erica's going to talk a little bit about her training website. So you don't need this.
No. This will just take a minute, but I wanted to take advantage of having you all here to show you the new website that we have put up on the controller's site, where we're kind of having a central repository for all types of training and other resources. If you go to the controller's website, there is a new link for financial compliance training. This is the site. It's got some information, just background about what we're trying to do for compliance training, our strategic plan, a draft, which it continues to evolve. What I did want to show you is a couple of things that are actually out there right now. We do have an effort reporting module online. It says for PIs because we're kind of trying to develop it as part of a bigger certification for PIs, but this would also very much apply to research administrators. It's got some Q&A, some interaction. Any feedback I would appreciate on this particular module. Once you go through it, it should take you 15 to 20 minutes at the top, and at the end there is a link if you want to send some feedback, and it does come to me. This is a good resource of the facts. It's set up similar to the presentation we did today with here's the facts and the rules and the requirements, as well as some Q&A at the end. We also have out there under prior presentations, the one you saw this morning as well as the one you saw this afternoon, which are PDFs of the PowerPoint presentations. The other thing that we are working on is putting out roles and responsibilities for, and you can see there are lots of different areas that we're going to cover. We have already put these out for the principal investigators. These are kind of our first draft, so any comments would be well appreciated. And it basically covers the 9 compliance areas and then further drills down to show specific items of responsibility for the PI as well as individual tasks. So I would appreciate you sharing these with the PIs in your departments. And again, any comments from these would be well appreciated. I've put this together from using other universities as a guideline, as well as some information that we've gotten from consultants and the information that's currently in our own policies and procedures where we have roles and responsibilities. And then the last thing I want to point out is under other resources. I know Paula, I believe, has shared this all with you in draft form, but the reference guide that we are in the process of actually printing now in a final version will be posted out here in a PDF form for each of the campuses. And these will be on here too. And the nice thing about having it online also is you can go to it and there's various links to the policies and other specifics in the policies. We've got our accounting procedures manual and the business policy manual out there, as well as just links to various regulations that I'm sure are also on Paula's site, but just another way, an easy way to get to them. So I wanted to show you that this is out there. If you have any questions about it, any suggestions, we're hoping to start using this to post more online training, and as we do prior presentations, to have that out there. So people who can't attend can go and take a look at this, as well as it being a resource that even if you did attend, if you wanted to kind of go and review it again. We are taping, obviously, both sessions this morning and today, and these will be posted on your site, but we will link to that from our site. I just wanted to show you this while we were here, and we appreciate you all coming this afternoon and taking the time both this morning as well as this afternoon. Please don't forget to take a few minutes to fill out the evaluation, and especially some specific things that you would like to see training on that would be valuable. If you could either leave those, just leave them on your table. We'll collect them at the end. And we thank you for taking your Friday afternoon on a lovely day to be here. Do you want to say anything?
Any last minute questions?